In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The impact of the federal intervention in Memphis, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Josh Spickler from Just City, Executive Director. Thank you for being here again.
Of course, Eric. Thanks.
Along with Cardell Orrin, Executive Director of Stand for Children Tennessee. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. This is a number of series of shows we've done and will continue to do, obviously, on the federal intervention, the Memphis Safe Task Force. Last week we had Memphis Mayor Paul Young talking about his take on what's going on, and I think the week or two before that we had a number of county commissioners, Democrat and two Republicans, and we're looking to get Justin Pearson. We've asked Steve Cohen, we'll be asking David Kustoff and many others over the weeks as we get reactions to what's going on here. So you all, I think it's safe to say, are not exactly in favor of what's going on here. I think we can say that from the start. But let me start with this kind of a variation on the question I asked Paul Young last week. Does anyone seem to know how many arrests have been made by which of the many agencies that are here and who has been arrested? Is there a comprehensive list in any way?
No. I mean, and this is a question that Just City has been asked quite a bit by many people inside and outside of Memphis, and the answer is no. Data exists, and there's local data, and then there's data that's given by the federal government about this. But in terms of who's getting arrested and for what, no, there's not a comprehensive understanding of that, and if it's even collected.
And the recent data dashboard that the city put out hasn't clarified anything in terms of which agencies is actually leading charge based on the arrest or stops that they've put out data about.
Yeah. And Paul Young had a very similar, here's the mayor of Memphis, he had a very similar take last week when we talked to him that he didn't know they were trying to get that. There is data, though, I think, showing, crime was already trending down overall by the measurements of the Shelby County Crime Commission, however you want to look at it. The general stats were already going down prior to this intervention. Data that was in the city dashboard as of a couple days ago, we had a story that, 4 weeks this year versus the 4 weeks prior year, crime was down even more in terms of arrests and calls and so on. Some people point at that and say, this thing's successful. Crime's coming down. Memphis has a crime problem. These guys are focused on the violent criminals out there. Your take, I assume, is different.
There's no evidence necessarily that they're focused on the violent criminals out there. One, to say that. Two, because we just talked about lack of information about the arrests that are happening and who's doing those. I think it's very hard to draw a conclusion that this is a part of an overall impact on crime. What we do know is crime was going down and already trending down as crime is nationally. And we also know that this has a repressive effect on people in communities. We've seen that in D.C. and other places where we've put the military out, that could be a part of it. People just aren't going outside because they're fearful of running into ICE, federal agents on the streets.
And that story was actually somewhat misleading, I thought, Eric, because the Marshal Service issued a press release that was included in that story in the Daily Memphian with the names of 7 people and their charges, and they were violent charges. I would suggest that if the Marshal Service had the names of 70 people charged with violent crimes, they would have included that. What's happening on the streets of Memphis right now is not focused on violent crime. This was never about violent crime. This was about a political power play and an occupation of a city that is predominantly black. And what we're seeing as we look at these arrests, because that data does exist, affidavits exist, police officers write up what they're doing on the streets, is a roundup. This is plain and simple a roundup, and the charges that result from it are not violent offenses. They are low-level drug and weapons charges. And it has a repressive effect, and so we might see a downturn in crime. But this is not a durable solution.
All right, let me bring in Bill. We'll come back to a lot of that.
What do you say to folks who are not seeing that presence? Because there are, depending on what part of town you're in some parts of town, there are no outward signs of this. What do you say to folks who live in those areas who say, I feel safer?
I mean, part of the challenge that we know is that even as crime goes down, the feeling of how people feel and the perception is very much driven by media, by what they hear, by the things that elected officials say. And what we consistently hear is that a media, in a lot of ways, especially broadcast, is driven by what if it bleeds, it leads, putting all of the shots out there. And we've seen that start to diminish since the deployment as we see this different change in narrative, as there's more support thinking about that this has some effect, when it's really just, we're just not reporting the same things in the same ways. And so some folks will see that and their perception will change. They will say, oh, okay, this is what we need, more police on the streets. And what they won't see is, well, what's the long-term impact? Am I really going to be safer? Are people in other neighborhoods really going to be safer? And what we know is that this will not have a long-term effect. And if we don't start to deal with the issues that people are confronting for real safety and security, then we're not going to see the change. And so they can feel like that, but the truth of the matter is that it's not having that impact.
Conversely, then, if, and I'm going to use your phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, happens on a big weekend, like this coming weekend, we have what we have periodically. We have a number of shootings, woundings in different parts of the city, and the TV coverage reverts to it and leads with that. Does that mean, conversely, that this is not working?
This is the problem with actually not looking at data and facts, is that, yes, from day to day, from week to week, from what's reported on and not, that, perception will change and people will say, I'm for it, I'm against it. That's why we need data. That's why we need information. That's why we actually need to have agreed upon facts and truths about what's happening in our justice system. And, Just City tracks this very well, so I'll turn it over to Josh.
Well, because the fact of the matter is, and this is not a Just City statistic, is that when these folks arrived, when this task force was sent to occupy our city, Memphis was experiencing crime rates that they hadn't seen in 25 years, in the positive direction. Lots of work to do, still too much of all sorts of any crime, right, is too much. Still higher than most of the rest of the country, but 25-year lows. And we have responded with a policy that, again, is not about violent crime. This is a political power play, right? This is not coming to Memphis aid. If they were coming to our aid, they would reinforce the things that we were doing, right, which was not flooding the streets with armed agents. It was supporting neighborhoods, supporting children, supporting communities that have suffered from disinvestment. If the federal government were interested in resisting more violent crime and keeping our crime rates low, they would invest in those things. This is not about that. This is our freedoms are at stake. Whether we live in a neighborhood where the National Guard are on the corner or not, this does not stop with a zip code, right? This type of autocratic behavior, this type of militarization of an American city doesn't stop with the people who we don't interact with daily. And that's what I would tell the folks, right, in the parts of the community that don't see this, is that this is an incredibly dangerous act, and it will come for all of us eventually.
So Mayor Young said on this program, and has said pretty frequently in other places, that he was not in favor of the Guard coming here, but that this is a chance to, in his words from the show last week, steer some of these resources toward areas that the city government wants more policing in. Is that possible?
I find that, the mayor's in an incredibly difficult position, but I find that to be naive. I find that to be conveniently ignoring the context around us, right? The context in this country right now is such that I think it's foolish to think that we're going to get 1,500 federal agents from 13 different agencies to focus on clearance rates, for example, to focus on the kinds of things that actually impact violent crime. That's not happened in any area of this presidential administration, or quite frankly, state administration's efforts in places like Memphis. They have come after law firms. They have come after universities. They are coming after locations where the population is black. And to think that we're going to be able to harness this in some way, this is a critical moment in America. It's a critical moment in Memphis. And the leadership that we need to see from our elected officials is that this is not okay. There's no middle ground right
And
now.
this is really, I mean, to the same point of the context of it. This is about Memphis, and it's about the country. And they're testing out things in various places. We've seen it in D.C., they're talking about Chicago, Portland, all different contexts to see how do we normalize militarization that leads towards authoritarianism power. And we heard the words in our own city from Bondi, Hegseth, Stephen Miller, mirroring what Trump has said about the specific ideas that they want to put across. And to a large degree, you either believe what they say or you don't. And other than that, you're kind of, keep hope alive, sure, that we can direct them in a different way. But what we know is what we've seen and what they've said, and we should trust that.
Well, but I mean, there's a bit of a contradiction here, which is that, as we're saying, we don't have the data. We don't know what the U.S. Marshals are doing. We don't know. We don't really know, right? Because we're saying we don't. There was a report. There's a ton of numbers that get put out, but we don't always know who's behind them. So how do we know that they are doing what they've done in other cities if we don't know what they're doing here?
I know what they're doing here, Eric. I've spent most of the last 2.5 weeks.
All 1,300 of them?
Reading. No, of course not. But I've spent,
well, that's what I'm saying.
I'm reading a lot of affidavits, and there are consistencies throughout them. I talk to attorneys. I sit in courtrooms. I've been sitting in courtrooms for the last 3 weeks. I am quite confident, based on 25 years of observing this local criminal justice system, reading affidavits and arrest tickets, that I know what the agents from the federal government are doing. And I think it's clear from the bookings, the data supports it. They are pulling people over for failing to signal, for having a drive-out tag, for window tint, and then they are hunting for drugs and weapons. That's what they're doing primarily. And I know that. I'm quite confident in that.
Why?
That is a bad thing because it doesn't lead to a decrease in violent crime. Number one, that's a bad thing because it's not what they tell us they're doing. They're lying.
I think they're not really telling us what they're doing. I mean, I would say from a transparency and news point of view, it's just it's so murky to understand what. And in the past, when there'd been federal task force here, there's often at least more transparency in the sense of this is a violent gang focused on fentanyl, or they would kind of come out and say whether or not that was, but there would be more transparency. I agree, there's not transparency and there's not data from a news point of view. That makes it very hard to report on. From as a citizen point of view, it creates some skepticism. But I mean, if there are people, if there are people speeding at 80 miles an hour, if there are people without drive-out tags, if there are people who don't have, there's people listening saying, yeah, all those things are illegal. They may be misdemeanors, but they're illegal. It's illegal to have a gun. There was an example, a person with a gun in their car, and in Tennessee where almost anyone can have a gun, this person couldn't because they were a convicted felon. They had 60 grams of marijuana in the car. So there's a sense, I think among some people that, these people are doing things that aren't legal. They got pulled over. They got a misdemeanor. And some of them, it turns out, have committed more serious or have done more serious things.
Well, then let's go do stop and frisk that many of the tough on crime folks, they brought in the godfather of tough on, crime commission brought him in as a consultant. Right. So clearly that has been the thing that they want to lean towards.
Explain to people why that's bad.
So that is bad because it's been seen as unconstitutional because it's searching for crimes. And it's not actually going out, doing investigations, doing the work that they tell us they will do as police officers to go identify crimes, to go get clearance rates up, to go actually see there is something that happened. Let's go solve a crime. That's not what they're doing. They're searching for things. And then for most of these are pretextual stops in low-level offenses that are just clogging up our justice system. So as we think about what we want for our justice system, whether you agree, everybody wants accountability. I think everybody wants to have a justice system that works. Everybody wants to have a safe community. And so we shouldn't be clogging up our justice system with the things that aren't going to actually make us safer.
And I'll go one step further. It's more than the criminal justice system and what we want from it. It's what we want in our community. It's what we want in our country. Now, talk about being naive and foolish. Here I go. But the United States Constitution guarantees us to be free in our person, free in our property, free to walk down the street, free to drive down the street without the interference of our government unnecessarily, right? Of course, the government can interfere to stop people from committing illegal acts. But the courts and the Constitution in this country is based on this idea that I have freedom. And when we're pulling over a person on a bicycle, like one of the 25 years I've never seen someone get pulled over on a bicycle for failure to use the bike lane. He's delivering food to try to make a living for his family. He has a gun in his hoodie, right? but he's on a bicycle and they pull him over. When those types of freedoms begin to be taken from us when we have an occupied city, we have federal agents in our city not letting us drive down the street. And they're not looking for me, right? They're not looking for a 50-year-old white man because I'm less likely to be a convicted felon. The people who are being pulled over and are found with guns, as you say, are more than likely to be African American, to be black people. And so when these freedoms begin to erode with literal federal agents on our street, where's the bottom? The Constitution still exists.
In your example, it's played out. Was it a legal gun? Were they allowed to have a gun? It's easy to have a gun in Tennessee, so it was...
I don't want to. I can get you information. I can look at that case, and I don't remember what all he was charged with. But they arrested him, right?
Right.
But it started with, and you can do that in any community in this to follow your point, which is a good one, right? We don't want drugs and guns in our streets, but studies for years now have shown that drug use is the same across races. Drug use is the same across economic.
Sure, and there's a target.
And so you could do the same operation in Collierville and come up with guns and drugs at the same rate as you do in Fraser.
Right.
And I would say, as the person who might be targeted in this, that part of the challenge that we don't want is the trauma that this creates. Think of the trauma. I mean, black folks who drive through, black and brown people who drive through the city, every day, all of us, generally, if we see police lights, tense up. There's a different kind of tensing up, especially in this environment when you're black and brown and driving down the street. And as somebody who's driven around downtown and when they've had some of these federal forces in and seen a whole van jump out of a car just because I'm driving around wandering in downtown Memphis, and what that looks like to have a whole crew of people jump out of a car and start to approach your car just because you're driving around and you look like you might be doing something, that's not a good feeling to have, and that's not the trauma that we want to create in our community.
And let me say, like I'm just telling you what I know. What people say to me, what they write to me, guest columns we get, people we quote in the comments. These are not my views, but there are people who push back on these kinds of things. We also have, I should point out, we have the example of Scorpion and the death of Tyree Nichols. And the kind of pretextual stuff this stuff gets haywire. I'm not saying, and anybody who thinks it doesn't get haywire is kind of fooling themselves. So I want to say that. We got 10 minutes here. Let me go back to Bill.
Let's talk for a second about profiling. Do you have any faith or confidence that when there's a wrap up on this and when there is some information given out, that we will have an idea of how much profiling was done?
I mean, no, but
right now, it's mostly reading individual reports.
Correct. Law enforcement, we could do it. Law enforcement officers know what it means to be, quote unquote, unleashed. And that's Stephen Miller's word that he used here in Shelby County when he was here 2 weeks ago. He said, "You are now unleashed."
Chief of Staff for the
White House, right? Stephen Miller said that you guys are unleashed. And the affidavits that I'm reading, it's very clear traffic stops are being made in ways now that they weren't a month ago, right? When it's all said and done, it would take a massive research effort to figure it out. But the problem with these cases and the reason that they're able to do it so freely is because it takes a court challenge. It takes case-by-case, deep investigation, a paper trail, a plaintiff who is willing, a person who is willing to sue or to bring his whole or her whole life into the public sphere. It's really hard to gather that data. Will we ever do that as comprehensively as the media needs? Probably not. Again, 25 years practicing, more confident than anything else I can talk about, that profiling is happening at a rate that is appalling, that is unconstitutional, and it's damaging not just to our community right now. When these agents inevitably leave, the fracture between the community and law enforcement is so much greater after they pull out than it was when they got here.
Let's talk about the compounding factor of this, because we have a DOJ report, whether it was retracted or not, that talked about the disproportionate harm to black and brown folks in the city of Memphis. And even as we've asked the city to give us data on that just for the police department, we partnered with ACLU to ask for data. They did it in 7 cities across the country. Memphis was the only one that wouldn't give us the data about what was happening with the police so that we could just check up on them since the DOJ report, much less what happens when we compound on top of that what's happening with federal forces. And this is another place where we've called for the mayor, and in other cities they've done it, to be consistent and say, we want to have the data, and if we're not getting the data from these federal forces and federal agencies, that we as the city as the county, will file FOIA requests to get the information because it's that important for us to understand the impact.
We now have attorneys here locally and attorneys from nonprofit law firms who work in this area who are here, who are looking into things. Is part of the reckoning after this ends, or at some point, if it continues, going to be a mountain of lawsuits?
Here's the context that we have, is that not just Memphis and in Tennessee, we've been experiencing this for almost over a decade now, of the assertion of power and control from a state down to the city. Now we're seeing it at a federal level, of assertion of power and control at the state level and at the local level. And so, yes, there will probably need to be a pushback on that, because as you try to create an authoritarian state, part of the challenge is who will stand up and say, no, this is what our law says, this is what our Constitution says, and we're going to defend these rights for the residents that we are meant to represent. So there's a challenge of capacity and resources to do all of these things, but let's remember that there's a state that's trying to take over a school system, that there are state legislators who are saying they should be able to take over the DA's office. They're saying they should be able to take over the clerk's offices. This is not just one piece. This is one piece of a broader context, both at the state level and at the federal level, and it really will hopefully come down to some people who will jump into litigation to protect our rights as residents.
Right. I mean, they're flooding the zone, right? There's a reason that before we went on air, we were talking about how one day feels like a week right now. They flood the zone. Everyone is reeling. The resources don't exist to bring the types and scale of litigation that we need right now. And they won't exist for a long time. And the people who are doing this to us know this. And so, in terms of costs and litigation, there should be, and there probably will be, but really what it's doing is our freedoms and our rights. That's the damage that's being done here, and it's really hard to have a reckoning for that.
3 weeks ago, Charlie Caswell, Democratic County Commissioner, represents Fraser, including Raleigh, including Nutbush. He made the point that people in Nutbush with a big Hispanic population are very concerned, hiding out. I'm paraphrasing, that kind of thing. He was, on the other hand, incredibly supportive of ATF, FBI, U.S. Marshals. That, again, I'll paraphrase him saying, we're the most violent community, he said, in Memphis. We have a violence problem. We have people who are broken. We have people who are lost. We want to help them, but they have to be off the street. And he also said we need to do more to help our youth, and we need to invest, and we need more resources beyond law enforcement. But he said that many of the people he talks to in a predominantly black neighborhood want violent people off the street and are, again, my words, not his, cautiously optimistic that this will help. With just a couple minutes left, what does work in terms of why was crime going down before this? And was it all investments in children and neighborhoods and people, or was there not an element of law enforcement that has a part in this in terms of bringing crime down?
Here's the cognitive dissonance I think that's happened, is that crime is going down here, but crime is going down nationally. And our rate of crime going down here is about similar to national, and it's not as steep as some other cities that actually have been making investments. And so if we were actually making investments, y'all know we were part of the Moral Budget Coalition, and part of what we asked for in this last budget cycle was investments in affordable housing, investments in violence prevention, community-based violence prevention, which is probably the most specific
Memphis
thing.
Allies, those sorts of groups.
I wouldn't name them, but I'd say, HEAL 901 and some of the other community-based organizations that do that work. Yes, and those are some of the best ways that we would most immediately impact this, and not just that, but funding transit, and people having access to jobs. So these are things that we're not investing in. So of course, when our city and county decide not to do what most of the municipalities did, raise revenue and invest in these things, then we get to a point where people say, oh, everybody's fearful, we've got to do something, let's throw up our hands and invite everybody in, and hope against what they are saying they're trying to come here and do, what they're trying to say they're coming to do across the country, that maybe they will help us to impact this thing.
A minute or so left.
All respect and love for Charlie Caswell, who is a friend of mine, but we, again, are being lied to. The things that are happening in his district are not about violent crime. I live in this community. I don't want people who have committed violence walking around with my kids and my family. But that is not what is happening. This is a roundup.
But I know you said that in just a minute.
Yeah.
How then do we deal with those people who are broken and who are violent and have committed violent crimes, if not through law enforcement?
Well, all the things Cardell said. And Cardell and I might differ a little bit here, too. I would have mentioned Memphis Allies. And I know, of course, law enforcement is a part of this. Now, they are not transparent with us. They are not accountable. They do not respond to requests. They are not doing the things the community is asking of them. But of course they're a part. And of course good policing is a necessary component of public safety.
Does that extend to the federal government, marshals, FBI, any of those? Do they have a role?
In their statutory role as DEA agents and FBI agents, but not in my city, not in your city. This is.
But wait, if the drugs are, I'm sorry, if the drugs are here, doesn't DEA have to come here?
Of course.
Okay.
But they don't work as stop and frisk. They are stopping and frisking and rounding up poor people in this community at a rate we've never seen before, and that is not their role.
And a disproportionate rate in black communities, because if you go out to the suburban areas, you'd see the same impact of drugs.
Suffice to say, as we sit here on Thursday morning as we tape this, this will air Friday morning and other people listen to it later. Neither of you are in support of this federal intervention. If the federal government were to come into Memphis in some form or fashion, how would you want that to happen?
I think the types of things that we need support from the federal and state government for are the kinds of things that actually work to lower violent crime and to prevent violent crime. And those are, by and large, not law enforcement resources, right? There are ways to build communities, to support communities, to enhance communities, to provide economic opportunity, transportation, health, that all lead to the continued drop in crime rates that we were experiencing before this occupation began. We can double down on the things that we were doing. Some of that's policing, of course. Some of that is having good, accountable police officers in our streets. But the majority of the kinds of support we could use are for building our communities and protecting and strengthening families.
Cardell?
And that's a component of, I think, what we got to take into the calculation is that some of the things that they could invest in, they've started to cut. Violence prevention efforts has been cut in the federal budget. And that's one of the best ways that we could see short-term impact on addressing both violent crime and retaliatory crime. Those are things that have been proven to work across the country that we could do more of here.
Briefly describe how those programs work.
So those programs work by seeking out, one way is in multiple ways. One way is to identify who are the people who are most likely to be violent in communities and have community-based people who are, a lot of them, credible messengers, people who have been in that life or been involved with the justice system, to go out and have conversations with them, talk to them, get them involved in other opportunities that are not in the way of violence. And at times where there are shootings in our community or battles in our community, going out to stop that from increasing. And so those are the best ways that are short term, in addition to the things that Josh named that would really create opportunity in our community where people have additional choices to be thriving citizens.
All right, let me bring in Bill Dries from the Daily Memphian.
So there is this lawsuit that will go to court in Nashville November 3rd for a hearing, seeking to remove the National Guard presence, saying the National Guard is cannot be used in that way under terms of state law and the Tennessee Constitution. We had the Mayor Paul Young, on this show last week, talking about how he's not in favor of the Guard, but he believes that the federal forces here, aside from that, can be used in some way to do what the administration wants them to do. My question is, can these two different points of view exist within our local politics, or is this kind of a fight to the finish?
Well, I think
between the two?
One thing I agree with the mayor is that we should separate the two. The National Guard issue is an issue. 1,500 federal agents is an issue. The National Guard issue is more of a foundational, existential challenge. What does the Constitution and the law of our state allow in terms of a military occupation? But to your question, can we coexist with 1,500 additional law enforcement agents? Not in the way they're being used currently, because the way they're being used currently is just a massive dragnet operation. They are rounding up people left and right. A very small percentage are immigration, but there's a big increase in immigration. But people are being disappeared from the streets of Memphis right now, whether it's into 201 Poplar at the jail or whether it's into ICE custody. And that does not do what they promised us they were here to do, which is address violent crime. That results in a massive fracture between law enforcement and the community, the trust that was already broken, that we saw on display in that Tyree Nichols video. That is why people don't trust the police. And when you send more police in to do that exact same kind of policing, nothing good is going to come from that. It's not going to make us safer.
But here's my point. It's the coexistence of the mayor's point of view, which has its backers, and the point of view that you and others who think this is just bad at every level.
I think there's two layers to this. And if we just zoomed in on Memphis, then maybe there's an argument about coexistence. If you zoom out across the country, then it probably depends on how you view the goal of what they are doing here and in other cities across the country. If your view is that this is an attempt to normalize militarization in urban cities, and that might lead to authoritarian rule, then you are probably going to say, no, there is not a way for those two things to come together. If that's what you believe, then part of the challenge is, what does Memphis stand? And even if the harm comes to Memphis, can Memphis be a bulwark and an understanding for the rest of the country of how we put up a wall to make sure that it is not seen as normal, that military is in our communities, and there is no way, even in the best circumstances, that is something that should extend, especially into elections where it could harm and suppress the vote.
We are out of time. We could talk for another 25 minutes. I appreciate you guys very much being here. I should have said at the top that we're recording this on Thursday, and as we said, every day is a new day. Many people watch this on Sunday. All kinds of things could happen. We didn't brush over them. It's just the timing of when we taped on Thursday morning. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Cardell. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full episode online, WKNO.org, YouTube, The Daily Memphian, or you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much. We'll see you next week.